Farzad, you touched on something that I noticed yesterday when I looked at the earnings, and that is that Ford lost $722 million on electric vehicle sales in the last quarter. And they anticipate for the year to lose $3 billion on the sales of their electric vehicles. And the number that I heard is that it cost them approximately $60,000 in losses for every EV that's sold. And I joke, well, how do you make that up? Well, you make it up in volume, but that doesn't really work. At a certain point, I understand that Ford Blue and Ford Pro, which is their commercial division, and their ICE divisions, are what is going to underwrite EVs moving forward. And I know they've got $29 billion cash on hand and $41 billion in liquidity. But how long can you continue to lose that type of money on every EV that you sell when your major competitor, Tesla, keeps, lowering the prices? And you got to believe that the only reason Elon Musk is lowering the prices is to stick it to the legacy manufacturers that are trying to come after him.
Yeah, it's fascinating commentary. I mean, so what you just described is there's a book called The Innovator's Dilemma that came out a long time ago and sort of describes this dynamic. So it uses examples like Nokia, BlackBerry, Xerox, and all these other companies that were sort of entrenched in this way of running a business, and then sort of an innovation or a new way of doing something came through, and it put those companies in a very tough spot. They're like, okay, so this whole thing, this new thing, let's assume Tesla and EVs do eventually become the new form of transportation. These legacy automakers are like, well, that's not really in our wheelhouse. We have to figure out how to shift. But the shifting is so hard and so expensive and so difficult for them that it actually causes them to go out of business over time. And I think Ford is starting to experience this. Scale will be very important for Ford to get profitable, but I'm talking millions of EVs per year that are made in a very cost-effective manner that the dealerships want to sell, and that the UAW won't be in the way from a cost perspective and creating chaos when it comes to negotiations as well. Not to mention that, are people even going to want to buy an EV for Ford in the millions of units per year, right? So there's a lot of complications that they're facing. And one of the comments that was made on the earnings call with Ford was that Ford is not going to go with a growth at all costs strategy around EVs. They want to be very strategic, which to me sounds like they want to be very picky and choosy in what markets they want to enter, which to me sounds like higher price EVs, which is not, to me, is not mass market, which means that Ford could go from a 4 million a year automaker to a 1 million a year automaker, especially if gas car vehicles get phased out over time. It's a very hard spot.
This is also the talking out of both sides of your mouth, as they say that they lower the price of the Mach-E by $4,000. So it's like,
sure,
what am I doing today? What am I doing tomorrow? It'll be interesting to see what actually plays out over the next couple of years. Another factor, another headwind would be the dealer, the fact that there's franchise dealers. And there was an interesting tweet from Car Dealership Guy, who it would be great to get him. Did we have Car Dealership Guy on the show one time, Pops? I forget if we've had him on.
I believe we did
way back when.
I know we interviewed him.
Before he was famous, Dad. Before he was famous. All right.
Well, before we were famous.
He's great. He's a really good account. I follow him all the time. Truly.
So here's a tweet from CDG. Recorded a great, I don't know, monstrous just sounds weird. Recorded a great podcast episode today with a big car dealer has acquired 15 franchise dealerships. Interestingly, he said the brand he refuses to acquire is Ford. His reasoning, Ford's leadership has severely breached trust with dealers. Quote, why put your hard-earned money behind leadership that wants to bypass you? We can argue all day if he's right or wrong, but one thing is for sure. If he thinks this way, you can betcha other dealers are feeling the same. And here's the thing. His perspective isn't even contrarian. The data also supports it. Kerrigan Advisors recently reported that dealer demand for Ford stores is declining. So is it time for Ford to rethink its strategic direction? I find this to be a super fascinating tweet. I can't wait to listen to that episode of the CDG podcast. And no, I'm not just fishing for an invite to get on there. It's really good content. That's another headwind that this business faces is we are, and in fact, Guy in the Kitchen has the comment here. Jim Farley has also expressed wanting to get away from the dealership model several times. I'm wondering how much of that is because of tension over that. Guys, we saw dealers, Ford dealers in particular, treating customers in a really not great way, taking advantage of what the market conditions were. This is something that Ford has to reckon with as well. They were the ones that came out boldly last year, Farzad, and set up 2 business units so that they could really pursue an agency model or direct-to-consumer model. How do you think about that impacting the future of Ford as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the dealership network was a great model back in the early 1900s, maybe mid 1900s, when there was a lot of customer abuse. They were trying to protect the customer from the manufacturer taking advantage of them. And that's why the dealership network was introduced, so that it kind of like even out the playing field, and then you have sort of third-party access to service. But in my opinion, I mean, you guys are more than welcome to sort of voice yours, but I feel like this is sort of felt by a lot of people. Dealerships have now become the parties that are sort of screwing people over. They price gouge in a lot of places, and a lot of folks are just not happy with the dealership experience. And so what Ford is trying to do, they're trying to say, hey, we're trying to move away from that model so we can have a direct relationship with the customer while selling our cars, very similar to the Tesla model, which is exactly what they do. The question becomes, is the dealership lobby going to allow them to do it? And is Ford going to be able to actually execute as with a direct-to-consumer model, where they can sort of do what Tesla does, which is try to keep prices as static as possible? And in the case where you're sort of passing on price decreases, you pass it on to absolutely everybody and be very transparent, and essentially get rid of internalize the service network as well, because that would be another thing you have to do, is bring the service network internally if you really want to sort of follow that similar type of model. Or you might just be stuck in a place where dealers, you're going to have to convince dealers to sell your EVs and to be partnered with you. And we know EVs have less maintenance overall, and it brings less money in the tail end for the dealership versus a gas car. So to me, it doesn't seem like the incentives are aligned for Ford to execute this cleanly. It's going to be a huge mess. And it's going to be fascinating to watch play out for sure.
I will assure you that the dealership lobby is large enough and well financed enough to never acquiesce to what it is that Ford wants to do.
Yeah.
Franchise laws in the states protect the franchise dealerships in those states. They're not going to give that up. And if Ford is losing as much money selling EVs or building EVs, think of the added cost if they have to buy out their dealers in order to be able to go sell them direct. Ford has tried, other manufacturers, they really don't want to be in the retail business. Okay. They much prefer to be in the wholesale business, which is what they're in. And so I think it's Jim Farley sending up a trial balloon. And so far, they have like anti-aircraft guns that are shooting down every trial balloon he sends up. It's not the way it's going to ultimately end up. The dealers have way too much power. They're not. They've got trillions of dollars invested in facilities. They're not going to give all that up. They're not giving that up without a fight. So I just don't see it happening. And I think it makes great PR to say this is the way we want to go, knowing full well when you're saying it, you're never really going that way.
It's interesting though, Pops, because you look at the data from that CDG tweet, and sure, it's great PR on the consumer front, but then it's terrible PR to your existing distribution network, which are the thousands of dealers. And last time I checked, who cares about the PR? Go try and buy a Ford. It's still a pain in the butt. I mean, there are good dealers and whatnot out there, but still, I mean.
And as far as that one dealer saying, well, they're not good partners. Ain't none of them good partners, because ain't none of them your partner. I will tell you, when times get tough for the manufacturers and they start getting stuck with the inventory, and then they force it down their dealers' throats, that, as I said to one of my general managers one time, I don't care that they want you to take them. I don't think we should. And the reason I don't think we should is, at the end of the year, They're not going to stroke us a check to make us whole for the losses that we're going to incur for having carried all this extra inventory. A partner would do that for you. Somebody that's not really your partner and just looking to get rid of their own goods, they're just trying to stick it. It's not truly a partnership between dealerships and manufacturers. It's not. They'd like you to believe it is, but it's not.